So blessings in Jesus' name. In this video, I want to expose the misuse of language to hypnotize and to utilize witchcraft in the form of the power of suggestion in order to lure people to death. It's done systematically, it's done repetitively, religiously, it's done trickily by demons. Now, a witch is somebody who goes away, a human being who goes away to serve Satan. They go into a witchcraft coven and they're taught the ways of death eating, the ways of capturing souls. The Bible says they fatten their bellies in a day of slaughter. So they get paid in the flesh in this time for hunting souls and allowing demons to use them as a vehicle so to do. Of course, the devil is the spirit operating in the children of disobedience, who are the witches, and those caught by them. So, if you think about, I'll give you a simple phrase. So before we dive into this, before we dive into things, words like dive contain the word die. But before we dive into this, before we dive into the world, you see what I'm exposing here? I'm exposing the misuse of language to ill effect. The demons are masters at it. Masters. They will use words to ill effect in order to lure people to death. So that means catchphrases. Catchphrases are commonly used sentences or ways of saying things which, when you actually examine them, aren't something that you would say repetitiously in everyday life normally. It's actually quite an unusual way to say something, or not the nearest thing to you to say in order to phrase what you are saying. So not the easiest phrase that you would choose. So that would make you wonder, why have they chosen to say, let's, one thing before we dive into this, why would they say dive into this? You can say many things. Before we start to da-da-da, or before we enter into a discussion about, or before we unpack this subject matter, or before we look at this topic for discussion. Before we dive into this is chosen because it contains, but before we die. Before we dive into this. So this way of saying that thing, because I've just exemplified, I've just shown you that there are many ways to say something. Why choose this? Because it contains the word die. That is the way demons formulate sentences. Lyrics in songs, popular phraseologies, common usage terms, all of these things have been conditioned. Men have been indoctrinated into them, inculcated into their usage, so that people are using them in everyday life to say things when really that phrase isn't the most obvious choice. Like, you wouldn't say, let's dive into things. Like, what are you, a deep sea diver? A swimmer? Why would you use that? Because it's saying, before we immerse ourselves in this whole thing, why didn't you say that? Why didn't you say, before we cover ourselves in this topic, or before we really enter into this and unpack it, before we delve a little deeper into Before we die into this, if you take away the v, you see die into this, the now, the world, the thing. Before we die into this thing, the possession, the thing of the flesh, pride in possessions, love of the world is enmity with God. Before we die into this, now you're talking for me? That might seem okay if you were actually addressing the subject matter that we're about to discuss when you say dive into this. But that's not the intention, and that's not why the demon has chosen that phrase or that sentence to describe what you're intending to do. It's very calculated, and it's a utilization, it's a usage of words in order to communicate something, which is sort of an intrusion, isn't it? Because if you're to take it in the other context, which nobody twisted your arm so to do, but it's still being stated, so that because seed has been planted in your mind, now it's easier for fourth dimensional cosmic spiritual entities to lead your mind along that line of thought subconsciously. This is called subliminal warfare. By inflection, by the utilization of words to seduce you to death, to lure you to it, to suggest to your mind to contemplate it. Before we dive into this, you might say, I think you're diving into that a bit too much and reading into it too much. No, I'm not. I've seen it time and time again. When your mind is actually brought to look at it, and you start to look at things in that manner, everything on TV, everything in radio, everything in the arts, you'll start to see a systematic implementation of choice wordings in order to lure people to death and to restate it and represent it systematically as much as possible to condition people to think that way subconsciously in their spiritual mind. And most people aren't even aware they have a spirit mind. They think there's only a brain in their head because they think they evolved from monkeys or apes or primates, none of which is true. You're image bearer of God, you have a physical body and a spirit body, you have a soul, and demons are trying to speak to your mind out of sight. They attack the mind through the brain without the brain knowing it. See how that works? That's some subliminal psychological warfare tactics outside of the conscious mind space, attacking your subliminal mind, which addresses things differently, because the complexity of your mind is greater than the complexity of your brain. And they know what they're doing, because they're attacking your mind, not so much your brain. Your brain is in the way, and they don't want to alert it or alarm it as to what they intend to do. Before they've slaughtered you, caught you, led you to death. And people who've been led to death and caught don't go around talking about it. They can't. They're conquered. You're a slave to whatever defeats you. So many people around you are the servants of the devil, servants of demons, and Satan has a remit to enter into them, because Satan is the spirit of the devil operating in the children of disobedience. Up to speed? So be careful what you watch, what you consume, what's in your Facebook feed, all of that stuff, because demons are using all of that. You're being tracked, and they're used algorithmically and demonically. So the algorithm's working with the demon, and vice versa. Understand? It's their system they've implemented, designed, in order to make it easier to track your movements so that they can present at that time the most powerful invitation to death that they can formulate given the environmental stimulus. So what they do is they speak to what's going on in your environment to make what they're saying have some kind of environmental anchor, so that it seems to you to be more tactile, more real, and therefore more powerfully communicated in a compound manner to your brain, so that you experience it in a way that they hope is overwhelming. But it won't be overwhelming. They're just trying to get as close to overwhelming as they can. But God won't allow it to overwhelm you. He promised that. I will not let you be tested beyond what you can endure. So they're They're restrained. They're restricted in what they can do. But they're clever. They're intelligent, powerful. And they've fashioned designs, systems to lure you to death. Be careful and know that you have a subliminal, unconscious, subconscious mind and a conscious mind, conscious brain, cognitive thought, but also a spirit mind that is superior to your physical brain. So don't be tricked. I love you very much. Turn to Jesus. Blessings in Jesus' name. If you is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. A holy kiss. Blessings in Jesus' name. Have a nice evening. Sleep well.